Hi everybody. This is part 2 of my primer of accents to Spanish for foreign learners, especially English speakers. And on this video there will be more, there will also be some pronunciation tips aimed to improve your pronunciation of Spanish and make it sound more authentic or native. Okay, so in my previous video I mentioned the pronunciation of J, pronunciation of J and Elie, pronunciation of S, C, and Z. Now I should mention at this point, I mentioned aspirating the S. I should also mention the dropping of the S. So in the previous video I was referencing some pronunciations of the phrase los ojos negros. Now sometimes when there is an S at the end of a phrase, now we went over aspirating of the S. Now regarding dropping of the S sound, sometimes when there is an S sound at the end of a phrase followed by a pause, it will be dropped completely. And this is especially true when there is some redundancy in the sentence, meaning that there is an article or a numeral that's showing that it's already a plural. So in this case, los ojos negros, there's a high probability that in accents where there is S dropping, if this is the end of the phrase, the final S will be dropped completely. So people might, let's say in my accent, Rio Platense, Buenos Aires, Rio Platense, if people drop the S instead of los ojos negros, it will be los ojos negro. And in an accent that also aspirates the first S, it will be los ojos negro. And in an accent that is Caribbean or Central American, where also the J is pronounced like an English H, it will be los ojos negro. This kind of pronunciation is often found in the Caribbean, Central America, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and so on. Dropping of the S is less ubiquitous than aspirating of the S, and to a certain extent it depends on the speaker, the situation, how slowly the person is speaking. Sometimes when people are speaking to somebody who is hard of hearing, they will do less dropping and so on. Either way, it's something that if you want to have an authentic regional accent of these regions, you have to learn to do. If not, you don't have to do it, but it is useful. But you will have to know. You will have to know about it in order to understand it. So it's good to get used to a lot of different accents. That's another tip that I want you to take away from these videos, is that if you're a foreign learner, you cannot stick with just one kind of person to listen to when you're practicing your listening. You have to switch it up, especially the more advanced you are. You have to switch it up so that you will be used to different accents and you will be able to speak to a greater number of people. Otherwise, you'll go to a new country or you meet another new speaker from a different part of the world and you will be stumped. And you don't want to be stuck in that situation. So, moving right along, we've covered S aspiration, S dropping. The PR consonant cluster. This is a very specific regional thing that you can find if you travel to Argentina. You will find that certain people from the interior of the country, they will pronounce, instead of tr, like tres, traer, and so on, they will pronounce it like ch, which is kind of funny because this is the exact pronunciation that a lot of English speakers do, because they can't pronounce tr. Still, so instead of tres or trébol, they say tres, trébol, and so on. If you're not interested in having this kind of regional accent and you think that this kind of makes you stand out as a non-native speaker, which it will, unless your accent is very perfectly local from that part, I will make a different video with a shorter video with a specific tutorial about what to do if instead of tres you find yourself pronouncing tres. Another thing that you can find, this is also a regional thing that can be found in Spain and in certain very specific regions of Spain. This is where the accent originally, this feature originally comes from. Anyway, this is something that can be found in Argentina, in the interior of the country, especially in the north, like western and central western part of the country. And this is pronouncing r, like the sound found in perro or rato, as j or j. So you will find people, instead of saying perro or rato, they will say pejo, jato. Sometimes they will have rounding, sometimes it will be a retroflex like pejo, jato. This is something very regional to Argentina, but if you're planning to travel here, you know people from that part of the country, this is something that you'll get used to very quickly. And it's definitely very different from many other accents of Spanish. So as far as regional differences, different accents of Spanish are concerned, this is pretty much it. But there's a couple more things that we can cover here that are very relevant to speakers of English learning Spanish. And they have to do with features of pronunciation of Spanish that are universal to every accent of Spanish, or almost universal. So the first thing to cover is something that you might learn if you have a native teacher or you're paying very close attention, and that is that in Spanish there is absolutely no difference in speaking between the pronunciation of the letters B and V, or as they're called in Spanish, B larga, B corta, or B grande, B chica, or B V. The reason we have different names for them is because in pronunciation they're pronounced exactly the same. So if you say B, you don't know which one you're talking about. In English there's a difference, so you say B, V, and you can tell in the English alphabet. However, you will find that the sound of the B or the V is not exactly always the same, and this depends not on the spelling, but on the position in the word. So, say that the sound in question is at the beginning of the word. So, for example, you have the word bien or vino, good and wine. So, bien, vino. First one is spelled with a B, second one is spelled with a V. The pronunciation is exactly the same. And what is the pronunciation like? It's like the English B. So, bien, vino. This pronunciation, this B pronunciation, also happens when you have a nasal, an M or an N, as the previous sound. And what happens, so you will have like spelling like MB or NV, and they will all be pronounced MB. For example, embargo and envidia. Even though the first one is spelled MB and the second one is spelled NV. You will also find that this happens when you have a word that ends in a nasal and then the next word starts with a B or a V. So, for example, if you want to say, for example, con vino, with wine, it's con vino, even though con spelled with an N, and then vino with a V, so con vino. So the rule also applies across word boundaries, like when a word ends in a sound and the next word starts with a sound, the rule applies. If the B sound, spelled with a B or V, is between vowels, it will be pronounced in a softer manner, and you pronounce it in a way that your lips don't fully touch, only like the edges of your lips will touch, or almost touch. Sometimes they don't really like proper touch. It's more of like an approximation. So if you want to say, for example, abuelo, you will notice that my lips don't fully touch, and avispa, same. This rule also applies across word boundaries. If you have a word that ends in a vowel, and then the next word starts with a B or V and following another vowel, this will apply. So let's say la vieja or la buena, same thing. Let's see. This is what you can call like the softening of the B. In linguistics, it's called lenition, which is a fancy word for softening. Let's move on, and this rule of softening also applies to D and G, spelled with D and G respectively. So let's say that you have, for example, the word Dios, right? Dios, the, and then adios, between vowels, adios, it doesn't sound like adios, like a the, it sounds like a the. The exact pronunciation of this is the pronunciation in the, for example, in the American pronunciation of the word southern, where the th is not quite so strong like in the word though, but it's softer, meaning that your tongue doesn't really fully touch your lips. It kind of like gets close to them and like not quite. So southern, adios. This also applies to crossword boundaries. So if you say, for example, Dios, it's the, but la diosa, the. The softening also applies to g. So for example, you say guita. Guita is an Argentinian word meaning plata, money. But if you say la guita, it's not la guita, it's la guita. It's soft. It's kind of like the R sound in French. So if you apply this softening in a native-like manner, you will immediately sound more native and less like a foreign speaker. This also applies to a very common mistake by English speakers, and especially speakers of American English, where there is the D in Spanish between two vowels. They will pronounce it like they pronounce the D in American English. So, for example, in the word, let's say, let me think of a word with a D in English, like with like vowel D vowel. This is let's see, coda, right? Like C-O-D-A, coda. It's not coda like it would be like in British English. It's coda. So this is a R sound. Now, if you speak Spanish, you might not have made the connection, but you will. But this is actually the sound of the ere, right? The sound found in let's say in aro, for example. So the problem is that sometimes you have a word with a D in Spanish that falls between two vowels, and you will pronounce, instead of, let's say, lado, you will L-A-D-O, side, you will say lado. And this is a problem because this sound is a completely different letter in Spanish, and this will lead to occasional miscommunication. So how do you avoid doing the Spanish D like the American English D in the same position? The solution to this is to pronounce the Spanish D in the way that natives do it, which is not like a D at all, not like a D or the, but like a the, like a soft the, like in Southern. So if you concentrate and say lado, todo, you will not risk pronouncing it like lado and toro. Toro, by the way, is a completely different word, means bull. So this will help out and make you sound like a lot less of an English-speaking foreign speaker. I will now mention, just to round this up, a couple more problems that English speakers often have when pronouncing Spanish, and I won't go in depth, and I will save this for a later video where I will do like more in-depth like pronunciation tutorials. Something that happens a lot with English speakers is that English doesn't really like vowels in succession without any kind of linking between them. So for example, when you have like a vowel next to another vowel, there's usually some sort of w or y sound linking them. This makes it difficult for English speakers to pronounce words like leer, where you have two e sounds in a row without any y or w linking between them. Usually they say leer instead of leer. And also because of like because of the way that English like sound patterns work, sometimes you'll notice that English speakers, instead of doing an a at the end of a word, they will do an a. For example, instead of saying coche, they will say coche. this is something to correct because it's really very odd when you say it in Spanish. And also there's a hyper correction. They will know, oh, I can't say a for a at the end of a word, so they will actually apply that to words that actually have a in Spanish, like ley. So instead of ley, they will say le, where the pronunciation is ley. If you're a Spanish tutor, you should, make sure that you correct this. If you are a Spanish learner, make sure that you try not to do it. Other common problems, unaccented vowels in Spanish. Sometimes English speakers will reduce them in an English, will pronounce them in a English vowel reduction way, or they will mix up unaccented e and e, or o and u, or a and e, which can create some problems because unaccented vowels are actually important for meaning in Spanish and in a lot of words. And finally, when there is an L sound at the end of a syllable, sometimes an English speaker will pronounce it in a more velar way. So say that there's something like alquilar, they will say alquilar. This is not a big deal. It's still understandable. The problem is that sometimes, because of that velarization, there will be a complete dropping of the L, which creates a bigger pronunciation problem. So instead of alquilar or alquilar, sometimes an English speaker will say alquilar and just drop the L completely. You don't want to do this if you're trying to speak Spanish and have a clear, understandable, and less foreign-sounding accent. I will go in depth into a lot of this on a later video. I hope you've enjoyed this, that it's been informative, useful, whether you're a teacher or a student, whether you're learning on your own or with help. I hope that I've been of some help and clear some stuff up. So, have a good one, and I'll see you later.